Thank you so much, Imani. So we've talked a lot today about next generation technology, NFTs, social commerce. We're going to do a little bit of legacy tech to make it a real Steve Gerber session. We're going to start with some PowerPoint. So to those in the audience, Melissa, do I press a button? This is recorded, so we'll be fine. But as Imani said, I'm Steve Gerber. I'm the president and COO of Zeta. I've spent more than 20 years in data-driven digital marketing, 12 of those at Zeta. Delighted to be here today with this panel, and we're going to talk about how marketers are changing their strategies and investments to compete and win in a new era of marketing. So what does that look like? Hey. So we talked a lot this morning about the evolution of the web, of Web 1, which was really defined by the adoption of digital. And it was really the rise of ESPs and DSPs to get to efficient scale. What then happened with the catalyst being mobile was that it was a move towards more efficient workflow. A lot of the next generation companies from that time that became the core of marketing clouds today, really the legacy marketing clouds, were about this notion of journeys and how do you build channel-based journeys in a way that was efficient. We believe as part of Web 3, it's not just on the consumer side, it's how marketers are taking control within a connected economy. So a connected economy is about marketing effectiveness. And we believe that's driven by a unified, always-on identity, insights that go beyond behavior to include intent, knowing more about what's going to happen, this notion of predictive analytics. Omnichannel touchpoints. Omnichannel goes beyond journeys to experiences, individualized experiences. And lastly, greater precision of measurement so that marketers know what's working and what's not working. And this new era of Web 3 brings about lots of new opportunities, many of which we've talked about today. But for the modern marketer, the connected economy is coming to life at a time of incredible complexity. And I'm going to walk through this, and this will be our framework for this panel. So starting at the top, this notion of the connected consumer drives everything. And connected consumer probably doesn't describe it best. It's a hyper-connected consumer that's only accelerated over the last 18 months. And this connected consumer is coming at a time when organizations continue to be disconnected. The siloing of functions, the siloing of data. We'll talk a lot about this notion of democratization of data today, and then as Chris Monberg and I talk about our roadmap going forward. And so if that's one dimension, the other is a very changed marketplace. On the left is a disruptive marketplace, the emergence of new competitors. Every single one of these panelists is either an insurgent or an incumbent that is facing a set of competitors that didn't even exist 5 years ago. And then on the other side of it, going back to this notion of what happened 5 or even 10 years ago, is a set of disjointed technology solutions. And so what that really means is that for the modern marketer, they don't have the systems and tools required to compete and win in this connected economy. They don't have what's required to identify, connect, and drive the desired behavior from this connected consumer. So we're going to start with that concept of the connected consumer because of these 4 forces, that's the one that's really tilting everything. So we'll start with Jason. You know, as you think about your business at Carter's, tell us a bit about how you think about the new consumer.
Yep, absolutely. So first of all, thanks for having me here. It's wonderful to see everybody and actually have a live conference. It's amazing. So at Carter's, we got into the ecom space in 2012. So if you think about that, less than 10 years ago, we were making decisions on, is this ecom thing real? Like, is this internet thing actually going to happen? And so we've had a huge transformation in 10 years from starting with ecom all the way through to during the pandemic when most of our stores were closed. All of our stores were closed for a while. we had to transform our entire business, and we had to think about things differently. The notion of curbside pickup was something that we had never had before, and so that was a fascinating thing to go through. And so we had people changes, we had process changes, and it was a transformation all the way through of how we had to reimagine ourselves as a digital brand, and just to compete, just to stay relevant. That's something that we've had to do over time.
Well, what's interesting with your business is that your customer base turns over consistently because parents really are the core.
Yep.
How have you thought about that, of going from boomers to Gen X to millennials?
The whole way we think about it has to evolve with our customer base, right? Because we will keep someone on average for 7 to 10 years, and that's about it, right? They'll outgrow our brand, and so the concept of live streaming, the concept of TikTok being places where they are is something that's new to all of us, but certainly new to Carter's.
Yeah.
And so we've had to rethink how we go about that.
Great. And Patrick, Simon is such a fascinating company because it's got multiple components, and you were a core part of the evolution of the brand, from thinking about being almost a real estate company to truly being a marketing company, as you've also bought some legacy brands. So how do you think about the connected consumer in your business?
Yeah, so you're right. For us, it's a she, and she's super connected, right? So because of that, she's almost hard to find because she's so fragmented. That's one thing that we struggle with, right? She's just everywhere at the same place. It's hard. She's time starved, so convenience is kind of queen to her, right? So curbside and every other variation of fulfillment is part and parcel to the way they're doing. And then she's diverse, right? And that doesn't mean it's every possible way you could define diversity. We used to think of as kind of a very monolithic, soccer mom or some stereotypical, or you have a few different groups. She is a lot of micro groups now, so it's hard to kind of put an exact little pin on her.
Yeah, I think actually the notion of the evolution from soccer mom, which is a great descriptor of a Web 2 type of segment, to today of having many different roles. How do you think about this notion from sort of the many to the few to the individual? Is that driving some of your thinking in terms of?
It is, yeah. So, from mass to personalized to segmented to hyper targeted. Those are things we've had to adopt, had to lean in heavily through all our different channels, tactics, campaigns, business units. It's been really fun actually, to kind of finding a much more individualized relationship versus just put something on TV or slap something in the newspaper.
Right. Well, we'll come back to sort of the unique challenges and opportunities associated with Simon, but I do want to go to Julianne, who's unique among this group in that you're really a digital first company, but also one that was a disruptor and now potentially disrupted.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the concept of the connected consumer. So if you think about health grades, think of us as like Yelp for doctors. And it's the largest marketplace for patients to actually find a doctor. And so they rely heavily, being a connected consumer, on health grades for trusted reviews. So I have to get a second opinion from a specialist, and what do I know about that doctor? And people are coming to health grades to find out about that. So it's absolutely, but health grades has been a very data-rich, data-first, digital-first type of company. So even with this new world, with the pandemic, like people were coming to health grades to find, does my doctor do telehealth? Before the pandemic, people weren't using telehealth for just an everyday appointment with a physician. And now people, like 3 times the amount of people are coming to their doctors and having those telehealth appointments. We're learning that that's kind of, the new norm. And so that is definitely, the place that they come to trust, so.
And that's a different type of a digital experience as well, as we've had to redefine space in many ways. We think about e-commerce, we don't always think about e-health that way. So that's interesting, and we'll come back to that concept. So Chris Marriott, a industry analyst, a former practitioner.
Yes.
But as and you have an interesting purview because you talk to lots of the biggest and best marketers, and some who perhaps are aspiring to be the best.
Correct.
How much of a catalyst for them thinking about the next generation of investments is this rise of a connected consumer?
It's interesting. You think about a vendor approaching one of these brands and as like a military, and you think, the top of the vendor is looking to get the surrender, and the general is tasked to taking a city, and a lieutenant's tasked with taking a hill overlooking the city, and each of them has an objective and a strategy that but they're all different from one another. And so what I see vendors struggling with is who's making the call when you're trying to deal with these, because they all realize, yes, there are major issues with connected consumers and challenges that vendors can solve for them. But again, it comes down to, where do they start? Do they start at the leader of their military level and say, that's our objective and strategy for fixing it? Or do they start, okay, we're going to start at the lieutenant, he's got to take a hill with his platoon, what's his objective and strategy, and how do we deal with that?
So let's build on that, because I think you're bringing up a good topic of the disconnected organization. And we try to refrain from military metaphors, Chris, but I appreciate the visualization.
I tried to come up with something less.
No, we call it land, expand, extend in a very pacifist way. But
I won't be invited back.
But I think part of that is the changing of roles. And why don't we start at the top, sort of that dichotomy between CMO and CIO? Why don't we start with Patrick and then go to Julianne and then back to Jason on the notion of the modern CMO and the modern CIO in this connected economy? How has that changed?
They're totally smushed together, right? They're the division, there can't be division, let's start with that, right? Because technology is marketing, marketing is often fully fueled by a technology piece. My role is actually to kind of serve as kind of that CTO, CIO inside of the marketing org, right? To actually be the fuel, the development arm, the folks trying to make things actually come from ideas to actually created products in the digital sense. So we've at the Sentiment at least kind of really embraced that you have to kind of have the two very harmoniously working together. We have great advertising and content teams and all these outbound marketing, and then the underpinnings of the platforms and then the products ultimately, right? The technology piece it's under one umbrella.
So what I think is interesting is Simon, largest mall operator, obviously has changed its business model. What you're describing, Chris or I would say, is the modern model. It's rare. To really bring that CIO type role into the marketing organization. I'm curious how Healthgrades has done that, again, being born as a digital first business.
Well, all the way from the leadership down, we've all been everyone is very tech focused. I would call myself a marketer who knows a lot about technology, but all of my stakeholders, we have to come to these decisions together. So it was my chief marketing officer that actually said, we have to put this first party data task force together. But the person who was holding our hands and helping us to kind of make sure that the use cases, the marketing use cases, and I'll get into that more in a little while, that we were trying to achieve could actually be achievable with this tech. So you'll see more and more of these chief marketing officers are becoming chief, data officers, chief type of things like that.
I think it's a great point, and again, it's been sort of this triad before that sometimes are operating in parallel, but this notion of convergence within the organizations is super interesting, and we'll get back to this notion of first-party data momentarily. So then there's Carter's, and one thing that I think is also interesting, Jason, is the journey that you've had from Verizon, probably is technologically advanced as any quote-unquote legacy business, to Amazon, which is a model for so many of us. to Carter's. So tell us a little bit about the organization when you landed, and then how it's evolved since you've been there.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting journey in my career, going through and seeing those three different organizations. Carter's is one where we're making mistakes. We're going along the journey just like everyone is, and we're doing it very thoughtfully now. And we're going about this from a standpoint of what customer experiences do we want to create, and how do we create them? And it really sort of boils down to that. What customer problems do we need to solve? What marketing do we need? And what technology has to drive it? And so we have to hold hands with our IT partners. We have to be in lockstep between CMO and CIO. That has to be the way of the future of how we're leveraging our first-party data. Because at the end of the day, the customer doesn't care which group out of the organization they're seeing something from. They see it as a brand. And so all of those, it's our job to make sure that all of those things work in parallel, and that we're not building something in tech that the marketing team won't be able to utilize for 2 quarters down the road, right? Those things have to be in lockstep. And so that's been an interesting thing to see at Carter's, how we're merging those things together, because I don't think that wasn't always the way Carter's was.
Yeah.
But we're certainly on that path now.
It's interesting. So from a Zeta standpoint, because we're seeing that there needs to be catalysts or a catalyst to bring some of these organizations together. Our point of view is that it's that unified data layer, this notion of always-on identity. And I just want to, and a big trigger for that is what we believe is a need for marketers to re-architect their first-party data strategies in the wake of things like the deprecation of cookies. So why don't we start with Julianne, of this notion of ingesting, synthesizing, preparing so that you can activate first-party data, how that has helped you move forward with some decisions.
Yeah, so at Healthgrades, we've always been, like I said, very data-rich, very digital-first company. So we had a really good handle on all the data sets that we had in a very organized kind of manner. But the issue that we saw across the organization is we had a advertising department that was using data sets separately from our insights department, from our product and our website department. And so we actually formed a task force to be able to make sure that we had a way to democratize our data sets. And so that was very important to us. I don't think we necessarily had limitations with, what data we had, because very data rich, but having a platform, having a structure and a strategy that was fit for purpose for everyone, that everyone across the organization could use, instead of just, okay, well, the advertising division, they have their data sets in order. We want to make this centralized for everyone.
Yeah, and I think Healthgrades is interesting as sort of a Web 2 moving into Web 3, but starting from that digital heritage. Again, we've got the legacy businesses. Before I go to the marketers, to the practitioners, Chris, as you think about the companies that you advise,
Yep.
years ago it was very much a channel and a technology. A lot of the conversations we've had is it's now starting with data, or you have even evolved in your thinking of starting with data. So how are they thinking about first-party data and how that fits into making changes in their marketing technology investments?
Yeah, I think, first I want to briefly touch on the whole CIO and CMO, because one of the things that we've seen in our work in advising brands is nothing historically nothing has exacerbated tensions between IT and marketing faster than any sort of MarTech platform decision. Because particularly when it comes to something like data, and IT is always, we want to play the data where it lies, and marketing will say, well, we want it as close to the platform as possible. But more and more these days, I think you're exactly right, that the value of first-party data across the organization, the acknowledgement of that, I think, has brought both marketing and IT closer together in both where do we get it, as well as where do we store it. And one of the things we're seeing as well is the idea now that dawning on a lot of brands, which is where does the majority of our zero-party data or first-party data that we have now exist? Our loyalty program. And so we're also seeing the IT is in there to help tie together data that is historically, you were saying you had data in different places. There's a treasure trove of data oftentimes in a loyalty program that the rest of the company doesn't even know is there. And again, so this whole data first policy, I think, is the idea that stitching it all together in a unified look is increasingly important. And so they have to work together.
And moving from silos to
Right,
unified.
they have to work together. Right, it's the only way to go forward.
And I'd even then say that then it's beyond like where you store it and where you collect it. It's how you start to share it. How do you
Right.
activate? How do you start synthesizing? How we have all these different business units and affiliate companies, and there's really amazing things where you start to actually bring, little tidbits from all these other aspects of your business together, and then it's like,
How have you done that? Because Simon is, again, fascinating because it's really building its own ecosystem. How do you think about data as part of that ecosystem?
it's a journey still for us, right? So we're still in the earlier days of taking what is a lot of different organizations, and you have to be, of course, very sensitive and thoughtful with what we can and can't share across different orgs. But the goal, right, is to have them work better and closer together from a single view of a customer that might be multiple people's customers, right? So where we can, it's informing very thoughtful little nuggets of truth. This is a shared customer in both our databases.
Right.
Because we both have permission, we can now share little bits of information that both sides would find of value, right? And so it's these sharing behind the scene moments that are really starting to unlock a different value.
How does technology or modern technology facilitate that in a way that legacy technology candidly inhibited it?
Yeah. So we're in process of leaving a big legacy tech stack, marketing tech stack, and the complexity and the lack of speed and just always fighting it. I remember going in to do a user level permission, and there was, I kid you not, 400, 300 checkboxes potential for one user. Like, what does this user get? I'm like, I need to have them run reports and think generate some API insights. So constantly from fighting things to just all of a sudden being able to actually help you, support you, right? Drive your business.
Yeah, and governance, continues to be important even as we think about the democratization of data. But I think that there's certainly an easier way. Now, Jason, within Carter's is a multi-brand business. How do you think about the notion of first-party data? How do you think about governance? And how did that inform decisions that you've made for new marketing technology investments?
Absolutely. So Carter's is blessed with a amazingly rich first-party data set. And a lot of that comes from our incredibly successful loyalty program. The majority of purchases that occur, both online as well as in our beautiful stores, we can tie back to a consumer. And that's all through our loyalty program, as you were talking about. And it's amazing because we have all of this rich data, and as you were mentioning, there's latency involved, right? And so I can't then analyze that data, action on that data forget about real time, just somewhat near real time, right? It doesn't have to be real time. But if you have a lag and you're running 500 ETL jobs that take 4 to 5 days to process to get in, it's as good as putting something in a filing cabinet and closing the door. And so we've really thought about, what does a consumer need? How do we need to activate a consumer, and how can we pull latency out of our MarTech systems? And that's been a significant piece of our moving away from an antiquated CRM system and moving into a CDP, whereby we can orchestrate in closer to real time.
So let's pick up on that last topic. So at Zeta, we think about the core value proposition having 3 pillars: that it's easier, it's faster, and it's better. better measured by things like ROI. Easier is about reducing that complexity, as we talked about the notion of governance, and then faster is generally speed to market or reducing or eliminating latency. In the recent decision that you've made to sort of rip out a legacy system and replace it with a modern infrastructure or modern ecosystem with a CDP at the core, which of those were, if you were to stack rank, what was the most important?
Oh, I think that the first-party data and our building a foundational spine, that to me was at the core of any decisions that I have made. I always say you've got to get your first-party data house in order before you can even think about orchestration or think about endpoints. But we went with a hub and spoke model, whereby I want data, decisions, all of those things sitting at the hub, and then pushing out to endpoints. And then we've got to go through the hard work of how do you align content and audiences and all those sorts of things. But none of that works if you don't have your first-party data in order, and if you don't have those decisions already baked about what you want to do.
And hub and spoke often makes things easier, faster, and better. And as you think about the Simon business and the emerging business model, or the business model that's in place today, it really is sort of a hub and spoke. Is that how you think about your tech stack or what you're moving to?
Yeah, it's similar. So for one, we definitely are moving away from monolithic, end-all be-all like mega clouds to finding much more focused solutions, companies that are moving at just a much more rapid pace of innovation around whether it's a channel, whether it's a data stack. So that's been one big thing for us. As far as the three pillars, as I was saying, complexity was just a huge one for us to get, because we just had people doing so much extra work to accomplish. We had DBAs running queries for every single campaign, something that smart marketers could and should do, better and faster. Actually, they know the audience way better than a DBA. So, but no, definitely looking for more thoughtful ways of kind of dealing with different solutions versus, the promise that often never gets realized of putting everything under one huge roof. You kind of the lowest common denominator, I think, you end up with.
And Julianne, with your recent decision, how did you think about that? I know you had specific requirements or specific pain points that you were solving, but I think you also had a broader purview as well.
Yeah, so I wouldn't specifically, the pain point was necessarily that the consumer had shifted more to a privacy-centric, I want control of my data, and cookies are becoming obsolete. And we had a very robust practice that was using a lot of cookies. So we made a decision probably back in 2020 that we were going to deprecate our DMP and have data strategies and audience activation strategies that were fully addressable, that were not reliant on cookies. And so by June of 2021, we had fully sunset our DMP and wanted a platform that was fully addressable for all of our unique data sets that we have. So that was a big requirement. And then, like I've said, our use cases. Every company has a different use case. Yep. And so you don't necessarily need to go find like the perfect platform without those use cases. And so I've always said, and I think a lot of people that work with me have heard me say, like, your use cases are your North Star. And so knowing what that is, so ours is, like at Health Grades, is connecting patients to doctors. So that's our number one priority. And then we have very specific things that we're trying to achieve. That DMP kind of model was not going to achieve that for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Chris, I want to talk a little bit more about the complexity of understanding a CDP even, because there is that evolution of DMP to CDP. There's also the notion of the evolution of the master data management into a CDP. And from a Zeta perspective, when we first started going down the CDP path, or calling our data layer a CDP, we had the notion that it was sort of one central hub and spoke for an organization. Gartner came out with a report recently that marketers, CMOs specifically, said they love CDPs, and the average enterprise has 4.9 of them. So they really love them.
Yeah.
And they're not buying 5 of them to do the same thing. Right. So how are the clients that you're talking with thinking about CDP in the evolution of their tech stack?
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve, and it's hard to believe that as recently as 4 years ago, most of us hadn't even heard the acronym CDP, and they burst on the scene as the latest big thing, and practically every MarTech platform that wasn't an ESP quickly realized it was cool to be a CDP, so they threw the name CDP on, which is why probably some of them have 4 or 5 because they're doing very, very different things, sure, even though they're all called a CDP. The challenge that we see is with brands is what I call the chicken and the egg. Oftentimes, which comes first? Well, first of all, do I need a CDP and an ESP as an example? And the answer to that is, well, it depends. And which one comes first? And the answer to that also is a bit of a it depends. And by that I mean way more than most brands realize. There's a tremendous overlap between what a real CDP does and what an enterprise ESP does. There's a tremendous amount of overlap. And the idea is that you can very quickly over-platform if you rush and get both right away and have one team getting a CDP, another team going out and picking a new ESP. Suddenly you're over-platformed, you're paying more than you should be, and you're building inefficiencies in. What I see smarter brands doing, and what I see smarter ESPs doing, is the idea of and my prediction is these are eventually going to be one platform. And just as the CDPs absorb the DMPs, I think the ESPs, or whatever the vendors are calling their email platform, but I still call them ESPs, are going to absorb the CDP in what I call CDP inside. And I think that's sort of Zeta's approach has been, not to tee it up, but I know you guys very early on saw the alignment between these needed to be was very important, or again, brands were going to over-platform or have distinct inefficiencies.
So I'll accept the teeing it up.
Thank you.
We did not rehearse this.
No, we did not.
But I think that the notion of a CDP inside comes back to what does this idea of always-on identity really mean? And so what I think when I hear that CMOs say they have 4.9 CDPs, it's almost like how consumers think about appliances, right? Where you have, if you think about motors, big motors, small motors, is powering multiple tools. And so we think about that as use cases. And so, from our perspective, we have this notion of a Zeta marketing platform. But the foundation of it is a data layer. And we had made a decision several years ago to get that right. That was the single most important thing. And that's also the one thing that's not visible to the marketer.
Yep.
So we had to work our way through getting that right to the point where it really is a CDP. And it's a CDP that powers multiple use cases. So back to, from the sort of broader to the narrower, as you were looking at different alternatives for taking the next, going to the next level with the Carter's marketing technology stack, how did you think about a CDP or a notion of a CDP powering applications or use cases?
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought about was not thinking about channels, mm-hmm, and trying to take channels out of the equation. Because to me, we need to be all channels, and we need to be able to talk to consumers in whatever channel they want. We need to be able to respond in whatever channel they want. And so the notion of being very siloed and having an SMS platform and an ESP over here and something that drives the web is exactly, I think, the wrong way of going about it. The right way of going about it is thinking about what journeys do I want to orchestrate, and how can I go about utilizing the data to create experiences. And so that was one of the significant changes in how we thought about what MarTech stack platform to go with, mm-hmm, was the notion of the only thing that we know is that things change. MarTech is going to change. In 5 years, it'll change again. And so one of the things that I looked for was I need a partner who is willing to evolve over time. And so that was one of the things that led me to Zeta, was that notion of, well, if we start with our data, then we can't go wrong. If we start with being the best ESP out there, you can make a lot of mistakes that way. And so that was the foundational layer of how I thought about it.
And you, Patrick, started more with the channel from a RFP or looking at the marketplace, but started with this notion that data, I believe, is the foundation of the evolution of what you're doing.
Yeah, it's funny. We've always just looked for connectivity with our shoppers. It's been a long term. I've been at Simon for 11 years, and our CMO has been religious about need to increase our connectivity with our shoppers, right? So this whole all of a sudden this rush to first party data, we've been doing that for a long time, right? Trying to grow audiences, mature audiences, utilize them, leverage them in thoughtful ways. Now there's better ways of organizing it, right? There's better platforms to activate it. And I do really agree that the CDP inside is happening, and it's actually really nice.
Right.
Where you used to have to do a lot of extra work to move data, outside of your owned and operated channels, with all these other systems like LiveRamp, all these other complex ways of getting data.
Supposed to make it easy.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It was always a bunch of extra steps and a bunch of other plumbing you had to build out to get your advertising team, your agency team, to be able to access what was your best data, your best insights. So it's nice to see it either being blended seamlessly on top or thoughtfully added on within. So I think that's good. That's really exciting because so much of that is just friction and just getting back to low speed and just
Sure. And was that one of the key criteria that you had? As we talked about sort of the Web 2, the cloud as a container of stuff. Tends to have more of a channel orientation.
Yeah, it's time has certainly taught us the same thing you're sharing of how the channels will change, right? So it makes it much more resilient and flexible, almost accepting that what's going to be next. We're ready to plug into that if you do have a solid data foundation. But yeah, it really was trying to get just a better control, especially then, and also that growth of as we bring more business units, more different partners into our ecosystems, that it just helps us extend beyond these very rigid channels.
Great. And Julianne, for you started with a fairly narrow use case, but again, as we've talked about, you have such an expansive vision of data, and again, your company was sort of built on this notion. But how do you think about sort of solving the today problem and evolving to tomorrow's solutions?
Yeah, so a today problem was marketers still are using DMP-like technologies. Partners have big retargeting practices and audience extension practices, and I really liked what you said about how the CDP can kind of eat up the DMP and the ESP, and essentially, I wasn't looking for a platform that was just a CDP. I was almost looking for something that was next generation DMP, and that's actually kind of difficult to find, is what our committee found. But I think having a good understanding of identity is very important, and that is very important to us as well.
Great. And this notion, Chris, and I'm going to pivot to decision making, and you probably have more experience than any human on this planet of how enterprises make decisions by committee. But do you see emerging themes around identity as a backbone, or identity, always on identity as we've talked about it, becoming the most important thing for marketers? And then how does that, you've had to facilitate many committees, both on the marketer side, sort of the marketing group and the tech group.
Right.
Have we found the connective tissue between those worlds?
Well, unfortunately, I have to go back to my military analogy. And I also want to say, when I use the term ESP, I use it as it's evolved from a brand. Most brands, when they think of ESP, it's sort of an anachronistic name, and they think of expect it to have email, marketing automation, social, and all the other stuff. So I just wanted to clarify
Most would
that.
call that a marketing cloud. But
We call it.
I don't want to. I know. Yeah, I know.
Right.
You own the
We call it
domain, and
ESP.
so
No,
it's part of the branding. Yes.
That we'll save that for next year. But getting back to the military thing, certainly at the C-suite, seeing the requirement for that always-on identity resolution and identity is critically important. And that's. But when you get down to that lieutenant, it's much more of the sort of blocking and tackling of the platform. It's some of the things you were saying, Steve, as you went back to ease of use, speed to market, those types of things that just make let's get my day job eat better as fast as possible. But there is a general consensus with all of them that critical set of data, it's been a cliche, content is king. I think it's becoming more and more recognized that first-party data, accurate data and first-party data is not just king, it's king, kingdom, and cathedral at brands. And I think that's, again, that great unifying feature.
I believe that was a tweet from you or a LinkedIn post.
Back in the day.
So, I know this says 13 minutes. I think we're going to try to wrap things up with some predictions for the future. So at Zeta, we often look to not just the next year, but sort of 4 or 5 years out. So as we think about this notion of going from Web 2 to Web 3, and we think we'll be in Web 3 for a while, what do you think about the consumer over the next few years? What do you think about your organization over the next few years? And how do you see your tech stack evolving in that time frame? We'll start with Jason.
So I think the way I think about that is, look, at the end of the day, making memorable customer experiences is what makes me smile. And so if I can figure out how to provide a rewarding moment for our customer, that's my utopia. That's what I'm going after. And so we have to evolve as a company insofar as how we go about thinking that way. We have to think about it not as individual MarTech stacks, not as silos, but we have to think about it from the standpoint of we all collectively own personalization. We all collectively own change management. And so in that sense, it has to be an organizational change all in the same direction, right? You can't have foot soldiers and generals going in the opposite direction, right? Just to continue your military view.
Sorry, Steve. It's a good one.
But that's really where we're headed is that we've got to get everyone marching in the same avenue, but all towards a customer endpoint, all towards providing value for the consumer.
And just to ask the question, because I think we have a consensus here of this notion of data synthesized into audiences, audience based on knowing a lot about that individual into individualized experiences. You're an omni-channel business. One channel that hasn't been part of this revolution is in store. Mm-hmm. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's absolutely a spot where we have got to change things. And so we've got to build better experiences physically in stores. And a lot of that we can do with, so we're putting in a new POS system. And so thinking about how we provide data into our associates in the store to make things better. Be it someone bought shoes last weekend and being able to provide a rep with the information of, well, our data tells us that you only buy shoes for your kids twice a year. And so if you just bought shoes last weekend, you're probably not interested in shoes anymore. And so just figuring out what those data sets are that we can provide to make that physical and in-store experience that much stronger. That's certainly a priority for us.
Yep, not to do another plug, but David Steinberg was on CNBC this morning talking about the evolution of smarter inventory management systems, of trying to connect supply with demand, which is also something that's sort of a 5-year out vision? Again, coming back to this notion of this data layer that's getting more and more sophisticated. Patrick, how do you think about the evolution of space?
Yeah, we're glad to hear the store being part of the future, because it's a huge part of our destiny. We see a whole lot more investment happening around fulfillment and logistics in and out of stores. So buy online, ship from store, buy online, pick up from store, buy online, return to store. The store being central in way more ways, and there's just a huge list of other kind of mix and match, fulfillment and omnichannel things that are happening and will continue to happen. For us to be playing more and more of a facilitator, for us to be kind of be a platform layer underneath that, whether it's the things that consumers see, the things that our tenants or the retailers interact with, or things that even like logistics and service providers underneath all of us, are doing. So that's a big part, like 2 to 5 year kind of piece out.
And then, but zooming out beyond that piece, again, so you're such a progressive company. How do you think about the evolution of your business and the evolution of your tech stack to support that?
Yeah. So your very initial comment is spot on. We're way more than a mall company, right? So that drives really the whole vision of what we used to think of in the systems and in technology. We were just trying to be a great real estate company. Now you're an experiential. It's dining, it's entertainment, it's hotels, it's actually running retailers. So we have flexibility, scale, so
right.
things.
All of which creates new data and creates new opportunities,
Yeah.
but also increases complexity.
Yeah. So we've moved a lot to the cloud. A lot of different services have definitely moved more and more, so we can just be able to spin things up and down dramatically faster as the first holiday. We didn't have weeks and months of buildup of servers, and it was just couple days, and we were ready for the huge onslaught of traffic that we'll see here, really ramping next week. But yeah, it's then to put all this, all these different things into, we call it the flywheel, start to actually have them work together. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Will be years to come, as we spin that thing faster and faster, so we can start to have the different sides of our business that are way beyond just being a landlord.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think of the digital transformation curve, and if you look at it from an industry standpoint, retail's certainly been disrupted and embrace that. Most analysts look at healthcare as one that's been that's less mature. Obviously, your company at the forefront of that, going through an acquisition now to build a true powerhouse there. But how do you think about sort of 3 to 5 years out of the digital transformation of healthcare and the role of digital marketing and the tech stack in achieving that?
Yeah, so I think there's no way to truly plan, because the ecosystem is constantly changing. Every year there's some new Google change, and so I think marketers really need to just be able to be nimble and quick. And suddenly we all hear, hey, cookies are going away. You have to pivot and make changes quickly, and can't just sit around and say, well, that'll go away. Actually move fast. And so that's what I think that we've tried to be able to do, is just to continue to evolve and move quickly when the ecosystem is changing. I mean, we just faced a whole pandemic, and we quickly got together and we're like, how do we, get more information out to consumers about what our doctors are doing, and the telehealth example that I gave you. So I think it's just that being nimble and being quick and being able to pivot quickly.
Yeah, and that's great. And the digital experiences in healthcare, I think, is something that's potentially transformational. So, Chris, just to close out this notion of predictions, digital transformation's gone from buzzword to boardroom topic in record time. So, how do you think about that as you think about the evolution of the tech stack at some of the world's biggest brands?
Well, I think one of the things that brands, I think digital transformation has certainly been embraced. And again, as we've talked about, it means different things to different people. within the organization. And it takes a much more global meaning in the C-suite, and it takes a make my day-to-day job better, and you can call it whatever you want, at the practitioner level. Where I see a need for change in the next 4 or 5 years is brands and vendors have gotten very good at delivering the data to the interface. In other words, when you're dealing with a company digitally, oftentimes you have everything you need. But we're never going to eliminate the human connection with customers that companies maintain, whether it's at the call center or whether it's at the brick and mortar. And I think there's still a huge disconnect there. And that's a single point of failure that probably all of us have experienced at one point or another, where we expect a piece of data to be at the call center, we expect a piece of data to even be available to brick and mortar, and it's not there. So I see the next sort of phase of digital transformation being taking this data that we've all agreed is tremendously important to brands and to vendors, and sort of the last frontier, really getting it down to where the person meets the customer.
And I think that's a great way to end it, back to the brand meeting the customer. The notion that we've talked about to synthesize it really is the importance of this data layer, the importance of knowing who you're communicating with, and the importance of being able to ingest, synthesize, prepare so that you can act on data. I'm going to end with another slide. I don't know if it's coming up. But this is showing the fight for consumer attention. 20 plus years ago, Seth Godin, one of the pioneers of internet marketing, talked about this attention economy. This is showing that every minute of every day, what consumers are doing. In 5 years, consumers are only going to be more connected. So the importance for us to get the messaging right so that we are more relevant and we're able to build relationships with customers is going to be even more important, not just for bringing on new ones, but really deepening loyalty today and into the future. So want to thank the panel for a great discussion, and I want to thank all of you for being part of it.